welcome to the World Championship Caster Desk here at BlizzCon 2016. My name is TJ, and I am joined by nobody better to cast a Priest match. It's Brian Kibler. Brian Kibler, how pumped are you for this first quarterfinal?
I'm really excited. You know, going into this, we all sort of saw Hamster's decks in the opening week, and we're like, oh, you know, it'd be great to see if he could go through it. He did. And now seeing if he can get those wins here on the big stage at BlizzCon, it's a big question mark, especially given the Jasonzhou's changes to his lineup, but I'm excited to see it.
Well, the story coming in is that Jason catered his lineup towards defeating Hamster, knowing that he would probably stick to the same decks. I mean, he said it in his interview after he qualified through to the main stage at BlizzCon. He's like, you know what, I'm not gonna change them. I'm sticking to the decks that I'm loyal to. But we had all said that Hamster wasn't gonna make it to the group stage because of his decks. And he made it to the group stage. Now everybody's saying he's not gonna make it to the semifinals of BlizzCon because of his decks. Is he gonna make it?
I mean, I have faith. You know, I have faith in the light, just like he was saying in that piece there. I'm someone who will play Priest. I literally was just playing Paladin backstage just before we came out here. And I have faith in the light, and I have faith in Hamster.
Dedicated to your craft. So the few changes to Jasonzhou's lineup that he's made, he switched from Control Warrior over to the Dragon Warrior to give himself, you know, a more aggressive approach. Also added Rogue to his lineup, which of course is favored against that Priest that Hamster has decided to bring. So first matchup of the quarterfinals for the World Championship, Hamster on the Druid and Jasonzhou on the Dragon Warrior that we just mentioned.
Yeah, and Hamster is playing the token version of Druid. He's not playing the spell-heavy Malagos burst damage Druid. This deck is built more to play wide to the board, which can be pretty powerful against the Dragon Warrior because they don't have access to Brawl like Control Warrior does. It can be difficult for them to react if you're able to get a turn where you get an explosive big board.
Yeah, so the Druid had an interesting performance over the course of the group stages. Druid was one of the worst performing decks out of a lot of the decks that players brought. Of course, you know, it's exacerbated by the fact that a lot of players brought Druid, so it's going to be closer to 50-50 than normal. But it didn't perform up to a lot of players' expectations, maybe because everybody knew that everybody else would bring the deck.
Yeah, it is a deck that has pretty high variance. Games where you have your early wild growth, where you have Innervate, those can be very powerful, but it can be more difficult in games where you struggle and fall behind, particularly the Malagos version of Druid, at least in the early days of opening week, struggled. We did see the token version that Hamster is playing perform much better until a little bit of stumbles in the final days.
Yeah, it does have a better matchup in the sort of Druid mirror. It preys on the other Malagos Druids because of the token nature of it. You know, they have a hard time dealing with the wide board.
And this opening turn from Hamster, he has Innervate and Coin to deploy a Violet Teacher. This gives him an ability to actually go in the board quickly. And this is one of the things that separates the token version from the Malagos version, the ability to go proactive early on. And in a matchup like this one, it could potentially end up being very strong if Jason doesn't have access to execute to remove an early minion.
Oh yeah, I mean, the one thing that Dragon Warrior struggles with is coming back onto a board that it's lost. It has a lot of tools to make its board lead even further, but it doesn't have many tools at coming back. Deathwing is one of the ways that you can do it, but it's very far away. It's turn 10.
We're a long way away from Deathwing here.
But, you know, you have to flip that switch early and start playing towards those outs earlier in this matchup if you get behind.
Yeah, and the Fiery War Axe from Jason here is going to let him potentially remove this Violet Teacher pretty easily over the course of 2 turns. Hamster, he does not find a Power of the Wild or anything to even prevent his Violet Teacher from going down to just Fire Blast from Jasonzhou. So, you know, Hamster invested a lot in that early Violet Teacher, and Jasonzhou has the tools to shut it down.
He does, yeah. Now Hamster has to really think, is it worth Living Roots? Should I play into a Ravaging Ghoul? One thing to keep in mind is Jasonzhou only has 1 copy of Ravaging Ghoul in his own deck. So this would be the best time to play into it. And to be honest, Hamster really doesn't have too many other options. Yeah, he went with the plan of applying pressure. Can he go away from it now?
Yeah, Ragnaros was not what he wanted to draw after that opening. He's already invested in Innervate, the Coin. Now drawing an 8-drop as his immediate turn 2 draw is not what he's looking for. Living Roots will let him make 3 saplings, 1 from the Violet Teacher as well as the 2 other. So if Jasonzhou does not find a Ravaging Ghoul or something else to allow him to contain them, they can do a lot of damage. But Jasonzhou does have that Fire Blast. So worst case scenario, he can just use his hero power to eliminate a lot of these 1-health minions turn after turn.
And one thing that Dragon Warrior does very well is it curves out well. It's very rare that it doesn't find some plays to make throughout every stage of the game. So if Hamster misses more turns, if he doesn't draw into things that he can play early on, Jasonzhou can slowly use that Fire Blast to chip away at the board and try and gain back the board control.
Yeah, and Jason here using his Alex as champion so he can remove 2 minions pretty easily and have the minion left on the board. This helps play around Power of the Wild if Hamster were to be able to buff his team with that. The Raven Idol for Hamster finds some reasonable options, but he's still very, very light on mana. He didn't have the acceleration from Wild Growth, so it's going to be difficult for him to take advantage of Nourish. He could potentially take the Nourish. He can't even cast it next turn, though. It's only turn 3, and he's already forced in a situation where he's reacting to Jasonzhou. It's not what he wants to be.
If he knew that he would draw into a turn 4 play, then he would probably opt for the Nourish, just because his hand right now needs a lot more gas as far as like the next few turns go. He can't play the Ragnaros until turn 8. He's already used an Innervate, but he picks the Swipe to sort of fill out his curve a little bit better. He's still gonna need something for turn 5 though.
Yeah, and this Hamster recognizing, okay, now my early Violet teacher was dealt with. I'm on defense now. He takes the Swipe. He's gonna be able to use that next turn reactively and hope to find something else to fill out his curve and allow him to deal with Jasonzhou's onslaught until he gets to be able to play Arcane Giant, Moonblade Portal, and Ragnaros.
It has been a while since we've seen Dragon Warrior be a really popular deck. The execute change, had a big impact on a lot of the tempo warrior decks, including Dragon Warrior, the old school tempo warrior deck that Dragon Warrior sort of replaced. Jasonzhou still does run double copies of execute, so he's got 2 of those, so he will be able to handle some of the big threats. But the thing about this Druid deck from Hamster is that it's got a lot of them. It's got both of the Arcane Giants, it's got double Ancient of War, it's got Ragnaros, the Fire Lord. If we get to the late game, Hamster is going to have a lot of big bombs to slam on the board, and Jasonzhou, it doesn't have as many to combat that.
Even just in Jason's hand, though, if we get to the late game, he has Ragnaros of his own. He has the Deathwing as sort of the ultimate trump in the matchup. There's only 1 copy of Mulch in Hamster's deck, which can make it very difficult if you do get to that stage to deal with Deathwing, particularly in time. Because you have that Mulch, maybe you can find it, but Deathwing gives you very, very little time when it's attacking for 12 every turn.
Yeah, usually a 2-turn clock, sometimes even a 1-turn clock when Deathwing slams on the board. You do give up your entire card advantage, but a lot of times at that point in the game, Dragon Warrior has expended their hand anyway.
Hamster deciding to use his Wild Growth here rather than Swipe, recognizing, I think, correctly that Jason has very likely a turn 5 play that will die to Swipe. The Swipe plus Hero Power and the Sapling will be able to remove the Kor'kron Elite and the Azure Drake this turn. So he's able to use Swipe and get a full board clear thanks to that Sapling remaining alive.
And now his Arcane Giant is also starting to get cheaper and cheaper as well, since he's cast a spell nearly every turn. And so that'll be a big deal. Jasonzhou has drawn into an Execute, and now an Activator for the Execute. So
he has the Fire Blast already, so he doesn't necessarily need the Activator for Execute, but mostly Jason here, he's just looking to put on as much pressure as he can. He wants to ensure that he gets to the point where he's playing Ragnaros and putting Hamster in an awkward spot. Hamster finds the Ancient of War, so this, unfortunately for Hamster though, really just plays into exactly what he's looking to do anyway, which is use this turn, removing a big minion, and then follow up with Ragnaros in the following turn.
His mana utilization is slightly awkward. He can't develop anything. If he wanted to play the Azure Drake, he'd have to attack in with the Fairy Dragon in order to activate the Execute. This is actually a big showcase of the Execute change.
Yeah, if Execute only cost 1 mana here, like it did for much of Hearthstone's life, the Blood to Ichor plus Execute plus Azure Drake would give Jason an enormous tempo swing. And we're kind of seeing, hey, that would have been really powerful.
It would have
Maybe it's right that it doesn't do that anymore. But yeah, we do see he's going to go ahead and use the Blood to Ichor just to clear the way and build a board presence. This is particularly powerful against the Ragnaros that Hamster has in his hand, developing a wider board and ensuring that Jason is able to continue putting pressure on. The second Swipe, it's kind of interesting. If Hamster wanted to, he could actually fire off those swipes both at the face, do a lot of damage to Jason. That's not quite enough for Ragnaros to threaten lethal, though. If Jason were at 1 lower life, I actually might imagine Hamster would think, okay, just fire off those swipes, put you to 8, with a plan of next turn drop Ragnaros, either kills what you have or kills you. But it will be Ragnaros for Hamster. He's looking to get a hit on either Jason or one of these minions. It's gonna go ahead and kill the Fairy Dragon. Now Jason, he has Ragnaros of his own, and this is a big moment here for Ragnaros. Does it kill his buddy Ragnaros? Oh, it goes face. Hamster down to just 3 life, but he has Ragnaros still in play.
He does have Ragnar still in play, but as you mentioned earlier, the math just doesn't line up. He can't double swipe and set up for a chance at lethal, but what he can do is use double swipe to clear the board and then have Rag hit face to try and set up a 2-turn lethal. One thing, he's at 3 health.
He has seen already one of the Quarterfinal elites and one of the Fireworks, in addition to one of the Alexstrasza champions. So there's not that many things that Jasonzhou could have the following turn to actually guarantee that he has lethal damage. And Hamster sets up, because of the damage from the 2 swipes, he's putting Jasonzhou into range that he could potentially just kill him with Ragnaros the following turn.
Yeah, it's really risky. There is a couple, there's Blackwing Corruptor, Grom Hellscream. Those are a couple things that could deal 3 damage at least the next turn to kill Hamster. When he go for it, he gets a Karen Bloodhoof.
This is an interesting line from Hamster here because he is leaving Ragnaros up unless he hits it with his own Ragnaros. And he does! Ragnaros goes down. Hamster is the master of the Fire Lord here, and now Jasonzhou, he's not only behind Ragnaros, but there's a Karen in play too.
Yeah, Karen is so tough to remove. That's almost always going to deal 4 damage the next turn. Jason does have a Twilight Guardian to try and block some damage.
And here Hamster, he has the ability, if he wants, to fire off, that's actually just lethal damage, I think. He can fire off 2 swipes to the face, attack in with the Karen, and yeah, Ragnaros will finish the deal. The Wrath kills off the Azure Drake, he just has lethal.
Well, we'll see if he spots it. The both swipes are going to the face. It looks like he has it. And that's going to be Hamster taking game number 1 of our first quarterfinal match.
And we saw, the Ragnaros showdown. We saw him in the Heroes of the Storm reveal earlier, and now making his debut in game 1 of the world's top 8 today, leading Hamster to 1-0 victory.
And you can see in the little box in the corner of the screen, the Ragnaros mood lighting in the middle. It's something we've added to the Hearthstone stage this year to give it a little bit of flair, but Hamster now is on his path to a semifinal berth.
Yeah, you want to see the fire purging, the insects being burned to a crisp there. It's pretty appropriate, I think.
Yeah, we'll see if Hamster can continue to extend his lead in quarterfinal matchup number 1 right after this.
The Hearthstone World Championship is sponsored in part by Intel, T-Mobile, NVIDIA, and Republic of Gamers.
Why do you enjoy just sitting down and playing some Hearthstone?
因为炉石这个游戏，我觉得它跟其他游戏不太一样，它是一个最适合用来交朋友的游戏。如果只是在线上打的话，就没有那种面对面打牌的那种乐趣了。所以我觉得打比赛的时候能够，认识很多对手，也可以交到很多朋友，这是线上的游戏所，感觉不到的。我最大的愿望就是通过这个游戏交到很多的朋友。
Have you met a lot of people since you came here?
可能因为语言上有一些障碍，所以没有及时的跟他们来得到太多的交流，但是，能够体会到那种朋友的感觉。我感觉已经跟他们已经是朋友了。
What about the other Chinese players?
其他3位选手都是非常名气非常大的选手，这次也非常荣幸能够和他们一起来参加这个杯子课。
Do you think your life would change a lot if you won the World Championship?
会有吧，因为我玩炉石这个游戏最大的原因不是为了胜利，不是为了追求这些名利，最重要的是它其中包含的乐趣，这个对战的过程。但是如果赢不了的话，我也不会特别沮丧，因为我最大的愿望就是通过这个游戏交到很多的朋友。我觉得我已经得到了我想要的东西了。非常感谢暴雪能够设计出炉石这款游戏，它真的改变了我的生活。
Hamster's doing it for the love of the game, and that's what I love to see in competitors here at BlizzCon, Brian Kibler.
Yeah, I mean, the absolute passion that we see in some of these players just talking about Hearthstone and the things they love about the game, whether it's the challenge that it brings, the competition, or the opportunity to make friends, like Hamster's saying.
He's made a lot of friends since he's been here. The Chinese players tend to gather around him when he's like practicing his matches and playing, and he's a really magnetic individual to watch. And to see him play decks that nobody else dared to bring to the world stage. And speaking of that, we saw him get a big win with the Druid deck, but the Druid deck is not the deck that we're worried about in Hamster's lineup.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Though Druid has struggled, as we mentioned, during the BlizzCon opening week, it is the Paladin and the Priest that really stand out in Hamster's lineup. They're the decks that no one else brought. No one else is bringing either of those classes the entire tournament, and he's sticking with his guns and playing both of them, and we will see one of them here. It is the Paladin deck from Hamster.
Yeah, and I called Hamster an absolute madman in the pre-show, and the Paladin deck is actually the deck that I think is the reason why I called him that. It is so greedy.
Yeah, we've talked a bit about how he's playing Priest, he's playing Paladin. Paladin saw a bit more play throughout the course of the Hearthstone Championship Tour. It was really Priest as a standout that saw very little, but Hamster's version of Paladin is not only N'Zoth Paladin, it's not only anything can happen Paladin, it's both.
It is both.
I was joking on Twitter the other day that, I figured out how he built his deck, which was the overpowered quest that asks you to play as many 8 or cost more cards as you can. And he has so many in his deck, but only one in his hand as we start off here.
The old saying goes, you can't have your late game and play it too, Brian Kibler. N'Zoth is definitely a greedy choice for him, and very little cycle in the deck.
Yeah, he does have 2 copies of Lay on Hands. Those are a little slow, though, a little slow. But in this game here, Jasonzhou is the first one with an actual card on the board, coining out a Mana Tide Totem. That's pretty difficult for Hamster to deal with at this point in the game. We see the True Silver Champion in his hand, but he's only at 3 mana, so he's not going to be able to deploy that this turn. So it looks like he's mousing over that Doomsayer, thinking about trying to get a free turn with that and remove the totem.
Yeah, but the thing is when you play a Mana Tide Totem against the Paladin, if they don't have a way to answer it, which they usually don't unless they're playing like a copy of Rowling Blade, you get 2 draws out of the Mana Tide, even if it goes into a Doomsayer. And Jasonzhou doesn't have to worry about maybe a Solemn Vigil coming out from Hamster, which would punish him here. He could double Solemn Vigil each for 1 mana in that situation because of the fact that Hamster just doesn't have it.
Yeah, and we see the free turn that Hamster uses to just equip. Ooh, he equips a True Silver Champion, which immediately draws a Harrison Jones off the top for Jason. He does not have the mana to play it just yet. So I imagine Jason, we might see him kind of maneuver this turn not to give Hamster a good target for that True Silver Champion. He may have been considering playing Thing from Below. That is something that Hamster might use a charge to attack into if he were to play it here. He is going to play it anyway, so this will at least demand something in addition to the charge if Hamster is going to try and remove it.
One thing to note here with the greediness of Hamster's deck is that if he makes it to the late game, he's going to be in a better spot than if he was one or the other, whether it was Anyfin or N'Zoth. One thing that Shamans do well against Paladin decks, the slow Paladin decks, is they can hex the crucial targets. Against Anyfin, you can use a hex on a War Leader, and they never get that War Leader back from anything can happen. Against N'Zoth Paladin, you can use it on the Cairn, the Sylvanas, the Tyrians, to make sure that they don't get that back from N'Zoth. So not only do you pressure them early, you also have tools to counter their late game.
And Hamster chooses not to use his weapon. He chooses not to swing with the True Silver, wants to use a charge here, but it looks like Jason, he may actually not quite be able to play the Harrison without avoiding overdrawing.
Yeah, he has 9 cards right now, so if he plays Harrison and draws 2, he'll be at a full 10, which means that the next turn, he'll discard a card.
There's also the Doomsayer in play that Hamster played kind of as a tempo play. He just wants to get to the next turn. He only removes the thing from below, which he's already nullified largely with that Elder Peacekeeper. And we see kind of the results of Hamster's play here. He's been playing those Doomsayers into boards that he's already expended resources on or have already given Jason resources. So Hamster's kind of low on cards while Jason has nearly a full hand.
It's sort of the opposite of what you'd expect. Maybe not so with Hamster's deck, though, because as we mentioned, he lacks early cycle. So if he's playing a card early on, he's not necessarily replenishing it until later on. He relies heavily on mid-game draws to have plays.
But what Hamster is really looking to do is buy time. As we mentioned, his deck is really heavy on those late-game powerful cards. We see Lay on Hands, anything can happen already in his hand. If he is able to get to the stage of the game where he can just start playing those cards every turn, it's going to be difficult for Jason to mount a comeback.
You can see the blue lighting there for Sylvanas, pretty cool stuff. But once again, Jasonzhou is in a situation where it's going to be risky for him to play Harrison Jones. Now he's in a situation where he can play Tunnel Trog alongside Harrison Jones. But that means Sylvanas will have an easy target to steal, and then he'll still be in a situation, since he has 10 cards right now, where he discard a card going into the next turn. So this is an awkward spot for Jason, to say the least.
He does have the ability to hex this Sylvanas, but as you mentioned, there are a lot of key cards in Hamster's deck. You might see, oh, Sylvanas, great target to hex, but because of the anything can happen, because of the N'Zoth, there are so many things that you really want to use that hex on to prevent them coming back later. Sylvanas is not at the top of the priority list.
Yeah, Tyrion is usually at the top of the priority list, which is usually run in both types of the deck. Having 2 Tyrions over the course of the game. Tyrion is probably the strongest card in Hearthstone.
Whoa! That is an amazing result from Barnes. From Hamster's perspective, a different kind of tale. Perhaps for Jason, it's a tale of terrible tragedy.
Yes, it is.
And speaking of hex targets, the Cairn, what makes Cairn so powerful is the fact that even if your opponent has like a big mass removal effect after you use your N'Zoth, it comes back. And here, Jason would possibly have to use a hex on the 1/1 of Cairn in order to prevent that from coming back from a N'Zoth later in the game.
Which also means that if Hamster plays the real Cairn later on in the game, that one would come back. And if Jason doesn't hex this, and the real one comes out and he doesn't hex that, then Hamster gets 2 Cairns from the N'Zoth later on in the game.
I think Hamster is truly blessed by the light. I think that the light has shown favorably upon him.
He's the chosen one. He's the chosen one to carry Priest and Paladin through the World Championship.
Jason going with the Claws plus Maelstrom Portal. Going to go ahead and try and clear off everything but Bane Bloodhoof here.
Turns out there's still a 4/5 on the board.
Yeah.
That's
whenever
a position.
Whenever I was playing World of Warcraft and attacked Thunderbluff, there was always a Cain or Baron waiting there to kill me.
Yes, there is. Well, Hamster actually has both of his lay on hands early, so he does have his cycle. And he's actually in a good enough position now to where he can use them without fear of being pressured too hard. So this is a fantastic position for Hamster.
It's also worth noting that he chose to use lay on hands on his minion rather than his face. He healed 1 damage to his minion rather than 2 damage on him, just looking to preserve his minion's body against the possibility of a spell power, allowing the 1/1 plus the Spirit Claws to trade into it. But Jason does have Ragnaros. We saw this last game, and Bane goes down, but Hamster's hand, full of ways to deal with pretty much anything Jason can throw at him.
Yeah, but does he want to use inequality here to clear off pretty much just a Ragnaros? He does have Tyrion, but if a Hex were to come out, Hamster would be under a lot of pressure. And of course, Aldor Peacekeeper, as we know, doesn't do anything to Ragnaros. He's still gonna fire 8 damage shots.
Yeah, Hamster debating his options here. He's at a pretty high life total, so he doesn't necessarily have to deal with the Ragnaros now. He may want to wait and either deploy an additional minion, like this Tyrion he seems to be thinking about, or he is playing Paladin. He can just make the Silverhand recruits and potentially force Ragnaros to hit those, though, of course, Jason has the Spirit Claws that he can use to remove them, so not quite as good as preserving his life total. It will be Tyrion for Hamster here. It'd be interesting to see if he's choosing not to use the charge of his True Silver. Often players will use the last charge of a weapon when they play Tyrion, but he recognizes the threat of Hex come from Jasonzhou. It doesn't only just waste the charge of True Silver Champion in order to maximize the possibility of his Ashbringer getting value if it does die.
I mean, Hamster has had that True Silver equipped for many, many turns.
Yeah, turn 4.
Yeah, turn 4. So he says, well, if you have Harrison Jones and you haven't used it yet, you know, sure, you just have it. And Jason actually draws the second Hex here with the Azure Drake, so he's got another removal for one of the big Death Rattle threats or one of those Murlocs that Hamster is going to throw on the board. And this is getting quite scary, but Hamster realizes this board is big enough now to where I can stand using one of these equality clears.
Yeah, he's going to drop a War Leader. Interesting to see if he does choose to use his Swamp Ooze, because if Jason has spell power, yeah, he's going to go ahead and Swamp Ooze the Spirit Claws, even just a single charge remaining. He wanted to avoid the possibility that Jason just had spell power and cleared one of his minions immediately with the claws. He may get the bad news here, though, that Jason has not only another Spirit Claws, but a Lightning Storm and Azure Drake as well. So lots of options for Jason to remove this board.
Yeah, it's tough to say. Lightning Storm usually doesn't get too good in this matchup. One thing you can do is try and save it for Anyfin or N'Zoth to try and play a super late game. A lot of the times, if those come out in the late game, you usually will lose anyway if they've made it that far and haven't died yet.
Yeah.
But it is a strategy that you can go for. Jason has played this game very slowly, so it might be something on the back of his mind. But other than those specific situations, Lightning Storm doesn't have much of a use, so it would be pretty good here. But a lot of options. True Silver Champion's still equipped. He could still go for the Harrison Jones to try and cycle. That would limit his options to get spell power for the Spirit Claws to clear off one of these minions. He'd have to rely on rolling a Wrath of Air Totem, but he is going to go for it.
Yeah, right now, Jason is just playing a resource game. He got those additional cards from the Manatide Totem early, and Hamster's pretty low on cards. He's already dealt with several of his most powerful threats. The Lightning Storm hitting high on the War Leader there means that Jason doesn't even need to use his Spirit Claws. He's just able to go on offense fully.
And Ivory Knight, 2 copies of that in Hamster's deck.
Not an exciting selection of Discover here. He can take Seal of Champions, Noble Sacrifice, Divine Strength. He would heal the most with Seal, but here he's looking more for value because, as we mentioned, he's kind of behind in terms of the resource war.
Yeah, one thing, though, is I believe, I don't think Hamster's taking much damage. His health bar is hidden at the moment. And
he's 16, if I recall correctly. He did take the Ragnaros hit to the face after taking a couple of hits.
So this is going to be...
he's going to go up to 19.
This is going to be actually pretty crucial for Jasonzhou. He's going to get a little bit of information. 3-mana Paladin spells are not that common.
There's Divine Favor is one that he might consider Hamster potentially taking in this spot because Jason has such a big hand.
Which could be a big deal because Jason has a lot more cards than Hamster for the time being.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if Jason does try to empty his hand now for fear of Divine Favor.
It is a card that could swing things. I mean, if Hamster were to draw, you know, even 2 to 3 cards next turn, then that could make this matchup a lot closer and a lot scarier for Jason as this game goes on.
But Jason is just fighting for the board here. The Flame Tongue reinvigorating Harrison Jones, allowing him to take down the Peacekeeper, getting revenge there. The real Karen decides to show up. Well, the real Karen Bloodhoof, please stand up. And Lay on Hands is going to be the play for Hamster. Digging deep here, he needs to find something to deal with this board that Jason is threatening. He finds both Consecrations in a Bluegill Warrior. So that Bluegill Warrior is the second Murloc he's drawn. So there is the War Leader we saw dying earlier. So anything can happen, still not terribly scary.
One thing that you have to note about mid-range Shaman is in the late game, they can turn things that aren't necessarily threats into threats. And by that I mean totems with the Thunderbolt Valiant. So you can't play this matchup too slowly because eventually they will whittle you down and they can still hold on to their big threats. So you can play it, you know, if they play it very slowly, maybe sometimes you can do it, but you always have to keep that in the back of your mind. How much damage could I possibly take? One thing to also note is Jasonzhou has a copy of Bloodlust in his hand and in this deck. So Hamster knows this. Of course, they know each other's deck lists. And so he might be thinking about that in the back of his head. He'll play around the max possible damage of it moving forward here.
Yeah, and looks like Jason is looking to go with Thunderbluff Valiant here. He's able to play this pretty slowly, as you mentioned, because he does have that resource advantage. I'm a little surprised to see him going with the Thunderbluff here, just because he already has such threat on board, and Hamster did just reload. He just drew 3 cards from that lay on hand, and Jason, he's gonna go ahead and clear things off here and just push. How much damage is this? It looks like 11, 12, 13 to Hamster. So he does put Hamster in a position where he's threatening, if his board survives, to just win the game with Bloodlust next turn.
Yeah, he kind of has to clear. And at the moment, he doesn't have a way to full clear. He has double consecration.
Double consecration plus bluegill could full clear.
Oh, that is full clear?
Has the ability to take everything out.
And that would actually mean that he wouldn't have to use his second equality as well, which means he has a Wild Pyromancer and an equality left in his deck for an emergency clear later on. But is that worth all the resources? The Bluegill Warriors aren't necessarily resources because with anything can happen, those are going to come back later on in the game.
Yeah, well, if he doesn't play his consecrations here, he's just going to die to Bloodlust. So Hamster recognizes that threat, clears off the board. He is still at a rather precarious life total, just 14. And Jason, having gotten so many additional resources from Azure Drakes and Mana Tide Totems, he's just able to reload.
And he was actually pretty close to lethal damage just there with the 4 damage from the spell-powered lightning bolts. And even if he had drawn spell power, he'd been a little bit off. With Wrath of Air Totem, he'd been at 13 total. But 1 off lethal is getting very close, and Jasonzhou smells blood in this matchup.
Yeah, and Hamster here, he still has just a lot of powerful cards in his hand, but none of them that necessarily deal with the board right now. We see a second copy of Anything Can Happen, and this is one of the dangers of playing this really high-end, high-power deck, particularly with cards that are situationally powerful, like Anything Can Happen. There is that second War Leader in his hand, and if he had that dead, if he had another Bluegill dead, those would be great. But right now, Anything Can Happen, not much is happening. It's only 2 Murlocs.
And that Ivory Knight didn't really do much help either. Seal Champion still dead in the hand for Hamster. So he looks like he's going to opt for the Cairn. I imagine he's just going to try to put as much stuff on the board as possible this turn to maybe try and get an Anything out next turn. But even if he puts down the War Leader and it dies this turn, he would only summon, I believe, 2 Warlocks. Oh no, 3 Warlocks because he played a War Leader earlier. So 1 War Leader, or 2 War Leaders and 1 Bluegill Warrior.
So what Hamster's doing here, he's trying to preserve his life as much as he can. I think this may actually just be lethal damage from Jason, though.
It is.
Flame Tongue. He's got so much damage. Bloodlust represents 12. This is well over lethal for Jasonzhou here. Hamster tries to put up a fight, but the Murlocs are not enough, and Jasonzhou is able to even the series at 1 game apiece.
Yeah, and this is just one of those matchups where it's very tough to win if you're the Paladin. Hamster even had a good start. He was able to keep the board clear. He was able to keep Jason to a slow enough start, but it wasn't enough, and the Shaman is going to take the victory in game number 2, tying up the series.
Yeah, the big deal there was just how Jason navigated the resource war. He understood it's very difficult for the Paladin to deal with the early Mana Tide, coined it out, got 2 cards off of it, and then was just really able to ride his advantage from there.
All right, well, we're going to see what's going to happen in this tied series in game number 3 right after this.
Where do you think China ranks in as far as the regions in competitive Hearthstone?
Chinese player didn't play a lot of like international tournament. Basically, we play in our region, but we have a lot of talented players, and they all play very well. Let's see if we can get a good achievement this year.
What's been the difference overall between the competitive scene in China and the competitive scene in the Americas?
In NA, there are a lot of online tournaments, but in China, we have Golden Series. Every month, you have a like open tournament. Then you can travel and make friends and play Hearthstone. I think it's pretty cool.
What initially made you like Control Warrior so much?
Because I like Show. He is a very famous streamer on Twitch. I watch a lot of his stream, and I feel like, yeah, this guy played this deck pretty good. And then I want to try it, like just as a fan. That's why I always play Control Warrior. Yeah. Well, thanks to Show, he is a good mentor.
You play on both ladders?
Yeah, both ladder.
What is there big differences between the Chinese ladder and the Americas ladder?
America, they have like more counter players. In China, they have a lot of aggressive players. When I go back to China, I feel like Control Warrior is so tough on China because they all like aggressive decks. Always Zoo, always like Shaman, something like that. So you need to change a bit. I think a good player need to like make the change based on the situation, right?
One thing to note is that both of these guys are the last two remaining Chinese players. We've had success from Europe last year at BlizzCon. We had success from the Americas region in 2014 with Firebat. China has yet to have that BlizzCon title despite, fielding many strong players. Is it going to be one of these guys, Brian Kibler?
Oh, many players felt like the lineup from China this year was super strong, but we did see Omega Zero and Breath both fall in the group stages. And these two players having to go up against each other must be a tough blow for the Chinese community.
Yeah, they get along really well though, and after speaking to them both, they both believe that whoever wins this matchup needs to carry the torch for Chinese Hearthstone throughout the rest of the World Championship at BlizzCon. But back to the match at hand, these guys are tied up 1-1 in the first quarterfinal matchup of the day. And again, the story is, can Hamster find a win with that Priest and with that Paladin deck? He's gonna throw out the Warrior for game number 3 though.
And Hamster is playing the Cthulhu Warrior. We actually saw a lot of variations of Warrior throughout opening week, and most of the sort of traditional Control Warrior decks are now gone. We've seen them largely supplanted by Cthulhu Warrior, and we've also seen the kind of wacky version of the Arcane Giants Warrior that Hobby Out is playing. But the Cthulhu Warrior, in particular, has a lot of powerful tools for this matchup. Even if it doesn't have, say, Fiery War Axe, the Disciple of Cthulhu can do a lot of work limiting your opponent's early minions.
Yeah, it does still run the packages of cards that are great against Zoo Warlock. As you mentioned, Fiery War Axe, it runs Double Brawl. It even has a copy of Revenge, which was a card that a lot of Cthulhu Warriors didn't run for a very long time, but now has become quite standard, at least one copy of it. Jasonzhou actually off to a pretty good start. Young Priestess is a card that he has decided to include in his deck. It is a one of, but his consistency of one drops is something to note with how he built his Warlock deck.
Yeah, Zoo really leverages the power of the Warlock Hero Power Life Tap. It really wants to just play as efficiently as possible, get that down on the board, empty its hand, and sometimes even empty its hand intentionally and take advantage of, say, that Malchezaar's Imp we see in his hand. But the Young Priestess, though, can be especially powerful because the deck does have a lot of low health minions, and those can be vulnerable to damage-based removal, in particular, things like the Ravaging Ghoul we see in Hamster's hand. If, for instance, that Possessed Villager did not have that buff, Ravaging Ghoul will be really strong this turn, but instead, not nearly as powerful, and Hamster goes with the Disciple of Cthulhu.
Yeah, there's a lot of sweepers like that in the meta currently. Maelstrom Portal from Shaman is another card that allows you to play around at times, but we'll see if Jasonzhou can get going here, because Hamster's got a pretty good hand to combat some of these turns that Jason can throw at him. He's got the Ravaging Ghoul. He has the Brawl to sort of reset in that mid game.
And even just that Acolyte of Pain, if Jason doesn't have particularly strong minions, just has a board full of these small things, Acolyte of Pain can help remove minions as well as draw additional cards.
Yeah, even if it draws just 2 cards, if it gets attacked twice, that can be enough to give Hamster the resources that he needs to win this game.
Yeah, but now the Ravaging Ghoul comes down, takes out the Young Priest. It did not buff the Shadow Beast, so that will die as well. So just the Direwolf Alpha and that Imp remaining. What'll Jason find with the Peddler? Mortal Coil is quite nice, could potentially allow him to kill the 3/3 and get a card.
That's true. Also, there is some interesting interactions with Crazed Alchemist and buff cards.
It's true.
Including Direwolf Alpha.
Yeah.
You can give your minions weird interactions with giving them permanent stats if you flip them while they're next to a Direwolf Alpha.
And the Crazed Alchemist here on the, which we may see on the Imp, could be a fancy little trick understanding exactly how those rules do work.
Yeah, because what it would do is it would flip the amount of health to the Malchezaar's Imp to the original, so it would buff the attack to 2, and then the Direwolf Alpha buff takes place, which means you get the 3 attack from the Malchezaar's Imp, which allows him to utilize his curve a little bit more and use Crazed Alchemist in a matchup where it may not necessarily see as much. So I really like the creative use.
So fancy.
So fancy.
So very fancy. And now that also makes the Acolyte of Pain in Hamster's hand. It's facing down a number of 3 attack minions, not nearly as attractive. Shield Slam twice. So Hamster, I think he's looking at this and thinking, okay, I want to stem the bleeding as much as I can. It is a little odd to use 2 copies of Shield Slam there when you do have the Brawls.
2 copies of the
2 Brawls. So he has the tools to sweep up this board, and using his powerful single target removal already will leave him without the tools to clear off what survives after he does Brawl.
And one thing, maybe with 1 copy of Revenge, it's not as good of a strategy, but a lot of times warriors like to take that damage early on and then utilize their removal and their health gain, especially in Cthulhu Warrior with Ancient Shield Bearers, to come back in the game later on and to maybe, encourage the Warlock to overextend. So it is a really interesting play from Hamster. Those Brawls are going to, have a tough time getting use as this game goes on, but, he's got a game plan.
There's a Doomguard, so the Soulfire, Power Warming, and Doomguard offer Jason. Kind of difficult to necessarily use all of them. You don't really want to have those necessarily in your head at the same time. I think we'll likely see at least one of them used as removal this turn.
Yeah, I think, interesting. One thing that he could have done that turn was use the Soulfire to minimize the risk that his Doomguard gets discarded. But then if he does that, he doesn't really have any plays to go on with it. But he didn't play anything along with the Power Woman anyway.
So Emperor comes down for Hamster here, not discounting any powerful combinations like, say, Brand plus a Shield Bearer or Twin Emperor, but does give Jason pause as to just using his minions to attack the face. He's thinking, okay, what can go wrong if I leave this in play for a turn?
That's one thing that Hamster has shown tendencies towards, is just playing powerful minions that you can wait and get a better effect out of. Really early on in the game, we've seen him just play Sylvanas onto an empty board in a lot of situations.
And the Soulfire allows Jason to keep the Doomguard. This is huge because he's able to use just the 1/1 to take out the Emperor. Attacks in for 9 damage here, so putting Hamster down to just 9 life. We do see Hamster with a pair of Brawls in hand, so this could be big depending on what wins.
But if the Doomguard wins, that's going to be tough because Hamster doesn't have a way to activate the Execute in his hand, so he'd have to develop a threat behind it, not armor up, and take the risk of losing to a 4 damage spell.
Oh, Doomguard does not win. The Imp does, so second best outcome possible for Jason. He gets at least a 3 attack minion surviving. So he's looking for a little bit more damage. There's a Soulfire.
Oh, he's so close.
He can use the Soulfire right now, and if he draws his other Doomguard, he's
got to go for
tap, or any way to do 2 damage.
Abusive Sergeant would do it as well.
There it is, Doomguard for Jason. And he will take a 2-1 lead over Hamster.
Wow, what a call.
Right on time.
And keep in mind, if he didn't use that Soulfire to the face, he could have tapped and evaluated. If he didn't use that Soulfire to face and realize his outs, the Doomguard and the Soulfire would have not been able to be played both that turn. So great recognition from Jason, and now he takes the lead in the series.
Yeah, and that could be a tough matchup because the Cthulhu Warrior has a lot of tools. If it's able to stabilize, it's very difficult for the Zoo deck to come back, but he was able to just keep the pressure on, and Hamster just wasn't able to deal with it, and Jason takes the lead.
All right, well, we're gonna see what's gonna happen in game number 4 right after this.
The Hearthstone World Championship is sponsored in part by Intel, T-Mobile, NVIDIA, and Republic of Gamers.
How do you think the competitive Hearthstone scene in China ranks against the other regions in the world?
国服玩家一个是人数上比其他国家的玩家多一些，可能是多2、3倍的样子。另外一个就是国服玩家，他们的套牌都比较的普遍，就是那种可能每个人可能就是他们都喜欢玩一些主流的套牌。
Are you trying to show the world that China has more creativity by bringing decks that nobody else would bring?
因为这是世界上最大的比赛，所以我觉得它需要最好的是9个职业都有人带，这样比较好。所以我如果没人带的话，就让我来带吧。我希望能够改变一下大家对炉石这个游戏的看法。他们的套牌都比较的普遍，我希望大家能够有自己的想法。这次炉石这个游戏最大的乐趣就是自己组牌。可能我平时在生活中比较普通，所以我希望能够在游戏里面展现一下自己。我觉得炉石这个游戏能够给我一个很大的舞台。
Hamster's just a normal guy trying to make it at the World Championship at BlizzCon, Kibler, casually.
Just an average top 8 competitor at your World Championship. No big deal.
Yeah, he's impressed a lot of players so far. He said in his interview that he wanted to see all 9 classes represented at BlizzCon. And, you know, I don't think he realized that he would have to do it alone for 2 of them.
Yeah, not only the only priest, but the only paladin as well. I wonder if he knew going in. It's like, I'm just going to be the only one playing either of these classes. Because we've seen some paladin. We've seen a little bit of anything paladin throughout the year, and then his off paladin as well. Priest, though, kind of been a bit of a drought until Hamster came along.
Yeah, it's been very absent from competitive Hearthstone play, at least in the Hearthstone Championship Tour for much of the year. But now we're about to move into game number 4. Jasonzhou has a 1-game lead. He's up 2-1. Hamster still has those tough decks left remaining in his lineup. And this is what Jason planned for. He planned to specifically target those weak decks that Hamster had. And now he's throwing out the Warrior again. He's saving Priest and Paladin for last.
He played the Paladin once, did not go well against the mid-range Shaman for him. Jason just really navigating that resource war very well. The Cthulhu Warrior here against the Druid for Jason. Jason is playing the Malagos version of Druid, so crucially, that makes it better against a lot of the more controlling decks. Not this one, though. The Malagos Druid has the power of late-game burst damage, which makes it very effective against the healing classes, the Priest and the Paladin. It's not nearly as effective against the armor gain of Warrior in this matchup.
And Warrior usually does have enough removal tools to deal with the big threats that Druid has to offer. You know, there's, Arcane Giants, Malagos, Ragnaros, but, the early game isn't really filled with any minions, it's all spells. So you give that Warrior time, and the thing about Cthulhu Warrior is that it has an inevitable win condition of its own. You're not gonna have all the time in the world. As soon as the Warrior draws into Cthulhu in the late game, all of a sudden you have a big threat to worry about on your hands as Druid. And Jason does have the mulch to deal with it. but it's going to be tough.
Yeah, one of the big things about Cthulhu Warrior in this matchup is that it can go aggressive. It doesn't just have to sit back and wait and see, okay, can I deal with each thing you play? The kind of classic Control Warrior plan of exhaust you of threats, that's not what Cthulhu Warrior is really doing. Cthulhu Warrior is building to, like you said, that kind of inevitable win condition in the late game, and it can put pressure on in the mid game as well, and just individual mid-sized minions is not what Druid is at the best of dealing with.
No, not at all, and this is going to be one of those moments where Hamster is going to start that minion pressure. And Jasonzhou, even though he had the Raven Idol as an early tool, he missed the Wild Growth, which is crucial to the game plan of the Druid. They need to get ahead in this matchup.
Yeah, and Jason here, he has the Fandral, but the threat of any kind of additional damage from Hamster would allow Elise to take down the Fandral as well. He's going to go ahead and use the Barrel Rage to do 4 damage to that, and looks like he's actually just setting up a swipe for next turn.
Yeah, interesting. Swipe won't match up well against Cthulhu's Chosen. He does have the Living Roots to do so, but what he could do is Fandral Living Roots. But then he still doesn't deal with the Cthulhu's Chosen. His swipe Living Roots, is that what you want to be doing at this stage in the game to remove these threats?
He can just swipe the face and use the Living Roots there. It's not necessarily what your optimal play this turn, but you don't want to fall behind. The Druid deck really wants to be the one putting the pressure on the Warrior and not the one reacting. So if you leave your opponent with threats, it can make things dicey later on. For instance, he'd love to play Azure Drake. He is going to go ahead and just use the Force of Nature. It's crucial to note that Hamster's board doesn't really deal with this terribly well with what he has in play already. Each of the individual minions does line up very well against those. So this is kind of a proactive / reactive play because it gives Jason the tools to take down the minions that Hamster's deployed.
Yeah, very true. Living Roots, keep in mind, you talked about earlier that this has a limited amount of damage, which is good against the healing classes, but not so good against the armor classes. So you do want to try and save those damage spells, but it's very hard at times against Cthulhu Warrior. And one thing that's good for Hamster is he's going to have the Justicar True Heart on 6. So he's going to be able to start building up those huge totals of armor to get out of range of any of the Malagos damage ranges that Jason can play.
Hamster might be a little scared of just dropping that Justicar this turn and leaving Jason with Fandral, though. Fandral is a really scary minion to leave in play. The Hamster doesn't have a clean answer to it either. He has the Shield Slam, but only 3 armor right now. He can attack into it, then armor up and Shield Slam. That's not really what he wants to be using his Shield Slams for either.
Yeah, but Jason drew his secret weapon that's now been revealed.
Ooh, it is Yogg waiting in Jason's hand. That's a card that is not terribly effective in this kind of matchup. Yogg, usually a card that's good at getting you back into a game when you're behind, but not nearly as powerful as it once was prior to the change at just generating additional resources in a matchup that's kind of more based on attrition.
Usually you like to use it early just to provide a threat, to minimize the impact that it has on you and to provide a threat. If it produces minions of its own, that's when it's at its best case scenario against Warrior.
I just like to use Yogg early, often, whenever, let's do it.
You really want to save Yogg to use it early, but also late. Sometimes you can even use it mid.
What you want to do is Yogg and ensure that Yogg casts Gang Up on Yogg, so you get to Yogg again and again. But the Feral Rage for Jason off the Raven Idol here gives him a little bit more reach, potentially, if Hamster does generate one of those big armor totals. Hamster, though, he has a great answer to this Azure Drake. A Gore Howl is waiting in the hand.
It is.
And it's going to come down, chop down that Drake. Jason does have a copy of Harrison Jones in his list, so Hamster needs to be a little bit careful, a little bit leery of what the result of this will be. Or just a little bit scared of the Fire Lord. We've seen a lot of Ragnaros so far this match. That's a lot of damage.
And right now, Hamster doesn't have a direct way to answer this Ragnaros. He can use Beckoner of Evil and then Brawl. Well, he can answer it now, but he has to take another 8 damage.
Yeah, this is a big chunk of damage Hamster's taking here, potentially 16 from Ragnaros. And we were mentioning how crucial that armor total is in this matchup because of the burst damage potential of the Malagos deck.
And how much damage does Jason have in his hand next turn?
He's got a lot.
Double Feral Rage, Hero Power plus Moonfire. That's 10 damage from hand. Is there any way he can deal more than that?
It's not quite.
He'd be 1 mana off from double Feral Rage swipe.
But the Beckoner of Evil does get Cthulhu up to the 12/12. He has the Ancient Shield Bearer in his hand. Jason...
He's 1 damage off.
He is so... Oh, it's fire!
No way!
I think that's it. 2 Feral Rages, 9, 10... It's exact lethal from Jasonzhou with the second Moonfire.
Lethal. And Jason's
He's just counting it up. Usually Moonfire for 1 isn't how you finish the game off against the Control Warrior.
Oh my
but
goodness.
in this instance, Feral Rage plus Feral Rage, Moonfire plus Moonfire, that's 11 damage with the hero power. Jasonzhou is going to go up to a 3-1 lead against Hamster.
He dodged a rough matchup for his Druid deck. It is able to really put Hamster in a tough spot, having Paladin, Priest, and Warrior left remaining.
Yeah, definitely not the situation Hamster wants to be in. And you know, Jason there, the huge part of that match, that game, it was really Ragnaros. Ragnaros dealt 16 damage to Hamster when he just didn't have an answer, didn't have the armor to quite shield slam it, and it was just too much, and that added up. And Jason has enough damage taken in the end.
And he's just got the Dragon Warrior left remaining. The only deck left for Jasonzhou to find a win with if he wants to make it into the semifinals here in the main stage. We're gonna find out what happens in game number 5 right after this.
Have you started thinking about playing on the big BlizzCon stage yet?
I did think about it, but I need to be like, come out through the group stage first.
Have you thought about the money at all?
Yeah, it's a lot of money, right? I maybe spend some money to travel a bit and the rest, maybe to do some investment.
Investing into Hearthstone packs, perhaps?
Actually, I always do that.
A Control Warrior is always expensive, right?
Yeah, it's always expensive.
Who's been the coolest person that you've met in all of your travels?
My fans, my stream
Oh, your
fans.
fans. You have to pick one person, though. Does he have blue hair?
Okay, you are the coolest person. We can make a deal. If I win the BlizzCon champion title, I can make the blue hair. Yeah.
Deal?
Just like you. Just like you.
Just like me, Mohawk too?
Yeah,
Okay.
just like you.
Deal?
Deal.
Easiest deal of my life. He didn't even have to give me a counterpoint. I don't even have to do anything if he doesn't win.
But what will you do?
I don't know.
You'll be sad that he doesn't have blue hair. That's what you'll do.
Yeah, I'll be very sad, but I really like to see a blue mohawk on Jason, but also I'd really like to see Priest win.
Yeah, I think we're going to see Priest this game. I think we heard Hamster say he really felt like it was important that we see all the classes represented here at BlizzCon. This could be his last game. If he loses, Jason could move on to the semifinals, and Hamster could be out. So I think all the Priest fans in the house, along with me, we know what we want to see, right?
There they are.
Oh, it's Paladin. It's not Priest at all.
Wow.
He's still putting his faith in the light here. There's
He
still the
is.
light involved, you know.
Okay. He's got to win with all of his decks anyway to move on to the semifinals. So he's going to throw a Paladin first. Going to try and go with, I guess, what he thinks is the best matchup, as Dragon Warrior usually does pretty well against the Priest deck. Starts off with Alexstras's champion. Also has a Fairy Dragon, but that's going to be stuffed in its tracks.
Yeah, the Doomsayer here is huge for Hamster. It not only prevents Jason from keeping this minion in play and getting more damage from it, but it also stops him from deploying an additional minion this turn, which could cause Hamster to fall pretty far behind.
So this is an interesting turn. You know, you look at your Murlocs and you want them to die, but you don't have a turn 5 play right now. And Murloc War Leader plus Bluegill Warrior is actually a great turn 5 play. So I love this play from Hamster, just going with the hero power instead of developing one of his Murlocs.
Yeah, Jason had already deployed that Fiery War Axe on the sort of empty turn he would otherwise have with the Doomsayer. So neither of your Murlocs is likely to be long for this world. And Jason just going in, is making a statement here.
He's getting him. And there's the N'Zoth. I know it might look weird. Murlocs and N'Zoth in the same deck. But that's just how Hamster likes to roll.
All right, well, the True Silver Champion taking out the Fierce Monkey means Jasonzhou is going to have to find some new offense here. He has Crocon Elite, and that can do a lot of damage, especially if Hamster is forced to use the True Silver Champion and get rid of it. And we'll just use Ravaging Ghoul into the N'Zoth first mate. We see Jason's plan of trying to use the charges of his War Axe here, wants to get maximum damage out of each of these cards.
And he also knows that he needs to maximize damage. He's playing aggressively. He knows that the healing is not going to come forward very often. Here's that turn 5 play that we talked about. Hamster only runs 1 copy of Forbidden Healing, and the next healing is in his deck is 8 drops.
He does have the Ivory Knights.
Ivory Knights as well.
Those can potentially buy him some time, but Jason is going to use that Blackwing Corruptor, take out the Murloc, and there's just the N'Zoth's first mate and the Rusty Hook going to face. That all adds up, though. Hamster's already down to 15 life. It's just turn 5.
We're pushing 2. And Lay on Hands in the hand for Hamster.
Barnes gonna need to get a big show on the road for Hamster here. Ooh, it is Ivory Knight, but no Battle Cry when it comes into play off the Barnes. Just gonna get a 1-1.
Yeah, I mean, Barnes has a lot of great targets in this matchup. It's got Ragnaros, Light Lord, Tyrant Forging, any of the Death Rattle minions. Also, any of the Murlocs are also great to get from Ivory Knight because that's an extra Murloc that you summon with the Anything Can Happen. Ivory Knight, though, is not one of those. And Hamster is going to take yet another beating.
Yeah, the Crocon Elite gonna charge in. Lots of damage. He could potentially play the Frothing and try and hold the Crocon for later. He's got to recognize what his windows of opportunity are. Moving into turn 8 is when he could potentially get blocked by Tyrant Forging. So he wants to ensure here that he gets the maximum kills here with his minions, pumping up this Frothing. Still has access to that Crocon next turn. Ooh, Equality, though, is the draw for Hamster. Not really a board that you necessarily want to have to use Equality Consecration on, but already just a huge threat. He's going to use Consecration alone and trade off Barnes. So he's able to save the Equality. He could potentially use that with his Silverhand Recruits or possibly draw another Consecration or a Wild Pyromancer later, but just at 12 life, we've seen a lot of Ragnaros in this match so far. Looks like he may be waiting in the wings, make another showing next turn.
And look at this, Hamster is more than likely going to Lay on Hands because it's the only play that he has open to him, which opens up a free board for Jasonzhou. He's going to negate that 8 health that Hamster's going to gain and also develop Ragnaros as a threat. So Hamster needs an Equality activator here, and he's already used one.
So many expensive cards picked up for Hamster. We've seen Anything Can Happen just rotting in his hands so many times. And Ragnaros comes down. This is not looking good for Hamster. He's down to just 8 life facing Ragnaros. He needs a way to clear this board off. If that has Equality, it's Pyromancer. He's still in the game.
He absolutely needed that Pyromancer draw, and this is actually great sequencing.
Yeah, he's able to play the Equality first, then Pyromancer plus Forbidden Healing. That triggers the Pyromancer and keeps the Pyromancer in play. So it's still there, potentially able to combo with his remaining Equality in his hand.
That's something that even the highest level of pro players still don't do in some of the most important matches in the world. So it's a small thing, but take notes, people, that's how you do it.
But Jason keeping the pressure on, able to get that. Oh, another Pyromancer, though. Hamster finds exactly what he needs it, exactly when he needs it here.
But, I mean, he's still not out of the woods yet.
Not at all.
He can try and fish for something with Ivory Knight. He can use Equality Consecration combo now, Equality while Pyromancer coming out on Ivory Knight with his full mana. But these Anything Can Happen are still going to sit dead in his hand. He's only
so weak.
There's 2 Murlocs. But if he plays the first anything can happen, there will then be 4 Murlocs for the second one to summon.
It is worth noting that against this control warrior deck, this dragon warrior deck, he doesn't need the super powerful anything can happens that you sometimes need against controller. He's actually just going to go and use this as a singleton removal. So he's setting up for the next anything, recognizing, okay, if say Jason plays a Grom Hellscream, I need to have something to clear the board. And this is allowing those anythins to just be removal. The next one is going to produce 2 bluegills, which that's 2 removal spells.
Yeah, and I mean, Jason is drawing into a lot of damage, but there are recovery tools still left for Hamster. He's got Ivory Knight, which can heal him for up to 10. And if he's able to pick up a third anything can happen with Ivory Knight, he could be in a position where he could, change the course of the game and start being the aggressor in this matchup. Jasonzhou really has to try and, be efficient with this damage. I like developing the Fairy Dragon and removing the Murloc War Leader off the board now that he's seen the one anything.
Yeah, and Hamster here, he has some tools. There's Sylvanas. He's too far behind to use the Sylvanas this turn unless he just goes with the Pyro quality into Sylvanas. Still a little bit scary. He's sitting at just 10 life. But Sylvanas does make that N'Zoth a lot more appealing later on.
Yeah, it's a very scary moment because if Jasonzhou has a big drop, a big minion in his hand, it's going to be really tough. He's got Grom Hellscream still left in his deck. He's got Deathwing still left in his deck. So he's going to go with the Ivory Knight instead. He's going to take the Resistor. Picks up a Hammer of Wrath. So not the biggest heal, but it is a tool that's going to help him draw cards.
And Hammer is valuable, though. It can allow him to remove this minion without having to trade. The Blood to Ichor might look weak for Jason, but it does open up the possibility of Grom. Gives him the enabler for Grom Hellscream that can just end the game, 10 damage, and that's exactly what Hamster's at.
And we've seen Jason find lethal in some crazy situations. We saw the Doomguard earlier. We saw the Moonfire in the last game. Can he do it again with Grom Hellscream in this game?
And playing the Sylvanas here rather than anything can happen means that Jason doesn't have the opportunity to draw Deathwing as an out. The Deathwing, because of the Sylvanas on the board, would just give Deathwing to Hamster.
It would. You're discarding all your cards and giving your opponent a 12-12.
It's kind of rough, a little bit rough.
Not the most ideal situation.
Ragnaros, the White Lord. Ragnaros is going to potentially keep him out of range. He's not going to trade this turn because he wants the 8 life from the Light Lord. Ragnaros Light Lord bringing him up to 18, out of range of Grom Hellscream. There's no single card Jason can have this turn. He's even out of range of that Crusher giving big, and there it is. Oh. Hamster gets the win, getting back in the series.
Wow. So we might get to see the Priest after all. A close one, though. There was an out for lethal for Jasonzhou, but Hamster makes it happen and finds a win with Paladin. Crazy stuff.
Yeah, he was just able to maneuver just sort of on the brink of disaster for so many turns, finding exactly what he needed to get back in the game, clear the board, keep himself above water, and able to finish things off with that Ragnaros.
All right, well, we're going to see what's going to happen in game number 6 of this series right after this.
Hearthstone World Championship is sponsored in part by Intel, T-Mobile, NVIDIA, and Republic of Gamers.
The dream run for Hamster stays alive as he takes a second win in the series. Jason still has the lead 3-2, and Hamster still has the Priest left in his lineup, but is he gonna tease us again, Brian Kibler?
We'll see. This is, crucially, this is the matchup that Jason, he changed his Warrior deck. He changed his Warrior deck so it would be stronger against these heavy control decks. This is the deck that he is leaning on as his hope remaining in this event. He is the player with 20,000 games on Warrior, and now that's just the last deck he needs to win with. And Hamster's putting him to the test.
Both of his losses so far this series were with that Dragon Warrior. Hamster said he wanted to be loyal to the new fans that he gained because of his boldness, because of his choice for picking Paladin and Priest. He's gonna tease us again.
All right, well, it will be Warrior versus Warrior. The Cthulhu Warrior for Hamster. Jason with the Dragons on his side. It's tough to pick a favorite here. I got to root for the guy with the Priest deck. I want to see Priest.
Hamster probably planned this from the beginning. He said, I'm going to lose some games, and then I'm going to bring it all the way to game number 7 and win with Priest.
As dramatic as possible.
Yeah, Jasonzhou, though, he's got a pretty good curve there. Lots of dragons, lots of things that synergize with dragons. That tends to be what Dragon Warrior does.
Yeah, the curve for Jason looking really good. Able to start off with the Alcatraz as champion, getting in some damage. Hamster with no War Axe, so he doesn't have easy ability to take this out right away. And he has a couple of Cthulhu activators, but nothing that really lines up exactly how he'd like against this 3-3.
Yeah, it's a bit rough. Also, Jason has the Twilight Guardian next turn, so if Hamster uses Disciple of Cthulhu with the hope of trading it in to the Alcatraz as champion next turn, it would be stopped in its tracks. So it's a pretty rough opening for Hamster without that axe, but he does have some really good tools. He's got both Cthulhu activators for the Ancient Shield Bearer already, so that'll be an armor gain tool once he gets to turn 7. He also has Justicar Trueheart, which can start to get you out of range of what Dragon Warrior can do in the later stages of the game.
Ooh, but the Frothing Berserker is going to go ahead and just coin out an exhaust first mate. This allows him to buff up his Berserker, keep the pressure on, and eliminate that Disciple of Cthulhu as well. So Jason, a lot of pressure already, and Hamster is really being put to the test.
And Gorehowl is not a good draw. That's just another expensive card that he has in his hand that's not going to help him through this early game. Dragon Warriors can end the game early against Cthulhu Warriors because they just don't have some of the early game removal. One Revenge in his deck. You know, Revenge is often a tool that you can use against Dragon Warrior later on in the game.
Yeah, and crucially, using that Disciple of Cthulhu early means that Hamster is without an easy activator for that execute. So if he does, say, play this Cthulhu's Chosen, and a lot of damage gets dealt to minions, he's at a real risk of just dying to that Frothing Berserker.
And he's going to go ahead and play the Twilight Guardian here. Great 4-drop, and his curve just continues to be good. He continues to pile on the pressure.
Frothing getting angrier and angrier, already up to 5 attack. Hamster really needs something here. Cthulhu.
Oh no.
That is not what you want to draw when you are facing down an angry Berserker.
I'm trying to think of draws that are going to get him out of a tough situation. Brawl comes to mind. You know, that could give him a chance to reset the board and allow him time to develop, say, the Justicar Trueheart on the following turn.
This is just already so much damage for Jason here. He has the Corruptor as well he can use to clear that off, or just send damage to the face. He doesn't even need to necessarily kill this Cthulhu's Chosen. It would represent a lot of investment of damage if he did. And Hamster, he does have the 10/10 Cthulhu, so his Shield Bearer is active, but he doesn't even have the mana to play it next turn.
And I mean, at this rate, it looks like there's going to be even more than 10 damage on the board when he plays the Ancient Shield Bearer, which means the health that he gains is going to be negated by just the attacks on board the following turn. So this is definitely a rough spot. Hamster needs a lot of help, and Jasonzhou smartly trading in the 1/1 to play around the potential brawl if he were to play the Blackwood Corruptor here, instead of using his weapon.
He even sends 13 damage to the face if he wants this turn, including all of his minions and his weapon. And he's going to go ahead and remove the minion, it looks like. That will cost him 2 damage, but prevent there from being a terrible outcome if there is a brawl. So it decides to kind of hedge his bets a little bit, and still just pressuring so much. Hamster down to just 8 life here. It's a really desperate spot.
And he's dead on board unless he finds something huge here. And Ravaging Ghoul, I don't think is enough.
We have Ravaging Ghoul plus Execute. He can't armor up. He only has 6 mana here, so he's just short, and that is it. Jasonzhou advances over Hamster to the semifinals.
His lineup change paid off. He took the Dragon Warrior, he took the Rogue specifically to counter Hamster's lineup in the quarterfinals, and he's able to move on. A little disappointing we don't get to see the Priest, Brian Kibler, but that's just how it goes.
Yeah, Jason really heads up understanding of what he needs to do coming into this top 8, knew he was up against his countryman Hamster in the first round, modified his lineup away from his favorite deck, and here he is, as a result, moving on to the semifinals.
All right, well, Dan, standing by on stage with our winner.
Jason, congratulations on your victory, 4-2. Do you feel like your adjustments between the round of 16 and the round of 8 decks were the main reason you won?
Yeah, I mean, I know he would bring a Priest and the Paladin, and basically it's heavy decks, so I was cover my decks to be like a tempo and mirror range. That would be better to against him. So it works pretty well, yeah.
It's definitely not fun having to face against another person from your country in order to get to the round of 4, but now China is into the round of 4, and they have never won a world championship. Will you be the first person from China to take a victory for your country?
Honestly, I feel a lot of pressure now because I'm the only Chinese player here, and I just defeated my teammate. So all pressure is on my shoulders now. So I don't know. I will try my best to see if I can win the title for China.
All right, we'll try our best, and that's all anyone can ask for. Congratulations, Jason, our first winner from the quarterfinals going to the semis. For now, we are done over here, so let's head over to the sidebar with Admirable and Firebat to break down that match.